Hello there once again, and welcome to the Mayor's Magazine. I'm Mick Cornett, the mayor of Oklahoma City, and this is our show for May 2012. We're going to do something a little different this month. We're going to visit local authors. So each of the four people that you're going to meet today, or perhaps see again, because some of them have been on previous shows, has written some level of a book, and we're going to talk about their book and their work and why they wrote it. And in the first segment, we're going to welcome back an old friend of this show, Devery Youngblood. Devery, welcome back.
Good to see you again, Mayor.
Now, you were nice enough to ask me to have breakfast with you about 3 years ago when you were in the final stages of this book. And I was just, at that point, very anxious for it to come out because you wrote about something that I thought was very, very interesting. And the name of the book may kind of give people a hint of what the subject matter is. It's called Successful Failure.
Yes.
So you must have been asked countless times since then, how'd you come up with the name and why? Why Successful Failure?
Well, I think a lot of it comes back to the fact I failed a lot of the things in my life, and I've learned a lot from them. And I think we've had this tendency to see failure as something that's entirely negative. And the fact is we learn far more from our failures than we do from our successes. But unlike previous generations who saw that as a pathway to eventual success and happiness, we see failure today too often as something from which we need to be rescued. And so when you do, you end up interrupting all those great lessons that are painful, but they're still great lessons.
Are political leaders a better candidate if they've lost before?
I think so. And as a matter of fact, 2/3 of the people who eventually became President of the United States had lost a previous election at some point in their life. And I think that's a part of what happens. I think it also helps them to get out of the tendency that political leaders are called upon to fix things all the time. Mm-hmm. And it takes a seasoned pro to be able to look their constituents in the eye and say, we're not going to try to fix that.
Yeah.
This needs to run its course. We need to have some perspective about this. And failure teaches you that.
Yeah. You know, you're right, because I think back, you think of three, what I think are considered three of the most successful political leaders. Abraham Lincoln, Richard Nixon, who was on a national ticket, 5 out of 6 straight times, and then Bill Clinton, who I think most people think are just, politically so strong at being elected. All three of them lost elections at lower level positions.
And in very embarrassing ways for each of them in their own way. Lincoln couldn't find an election he could win. He lost way more than he won. Nixon is another great example because he lost up until Bush Gore, the closest presidential election of the modern era. Some would say he actually won the election, but that he did not choose to go the recount route, and it was a very painful experience for him. And then he ran 2 years later for governor of California and lost, and did the famous "you won't have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore" speech. And then Bill Clinton's a great example because his first term as governor, he became arrogant, he became overreaching, and got beat. And they had 2-year terms at that time. And it was a terribly humbling experience for him. And he learned a lot from that and came back and was a whole different kind of governor when he came back.
Yeah. So what kind of reaction have you gotten on the book?
It's been interesting because I think as much as anything, it's given people the permission to say, yeah, I have failed. Because in our society, we tend to want to hide that fact. Mm-hmm. We can't hide it. We all have.
Well, you're actually told on your resume, here's the way you should probably position this on your resume.
Exactly.
In other words, don't just put out a big exclamation point here and say I failed at this level of my professional career.
Right. I'm probably not the best of advice on that because I was actually interviewing one time and somebody said, I suppose the things that you've done have all been successful. And I said, oh, absolutely not. I've screwed up a lot of stuff, but here's what I learned from them, and I got the job. So I guess it worked out. But I wish we were more like that. I wish we could be a little more accepting and understanding of that, because that's been the biggest thing that I've gotten from people is, gosh, it is okay to talk about it. And I talked about some of my own failures, which was not a fun process to go through and put in writing. But I thought it needed to be said, some of those things that I failed at and what I learned by it. And a lot of it, I had to come back and say, wow, that one was my fault. And others I could come back and say, I didn't really have a lot of ownership of that, but I certainly paid the consequences for it, and I learned something through those as well.
You're a parent?
Yes.
Should you encourage/push your child into opportunities where they may not succeed, but you want them to learn something from the process?
I think, I so appreciate that question. My wife insisted on a whole chapter of this that we pretty much did together on parenting from our own experiences as well. We have to mentor our children in how to fail. we have to quit rescuing them all the time. And that's really true of this generation of parents. They want to make things better for their children than they have it, so they go and do things for them instead of allowing their child to struggle and to learn how to struggle and to fail. When you have a toddler, you understand that they're going to fall, they're going to do things, but they're learning how to be a child. And so you don't worry about that too much. Well, when you have a teenager, they're kind of like a toddler for being an adult. They're going to fall, they're going to mess things up, and you have to let them learn how to do it. Now, you don't let them go into a bad situation where they're going to get hurt. If your toddler's running toward the road, you don't say, well, I bet they'll learn something from that. You stop them, obviously. But you also look at a situation, other situations, and you say, you know what? I know that's not going to work, but they need to understand that's not going to work. And you say, well, good luck with that. Try that.
Certainly a person would probably be more humble after a loss. What else do you learn, though?
I think you learn what to hope for. I had a lot of kind of pie-in-the-sky ideas in my younger years, the things that I wanted to do this and I wanted to do that. And failure taught me, you know, you got to set some priorities. You're not going to get everything. You need to find out what is truly matches who I am and not try to be somebody else. So I ended up, I think, with a much better sense of perspective about what to hope for, the kinds of jobs I want to have in my career. I now know certain things I don't want to do. I'm qualified. I could do them. I think people see me as somebody who could do them. I don't want to do them because it's really not who I am. It's not the kind of thing I want to do. And so I learned that mostly through failure by trying it and realizing, wow, that doesn't work for me.
I'm going to hold up the book. You tell us where we can get it.
You can get this at successfulfailure.net, and I'll be happy to autograph it and send it out to you.
Okay. Devery Youngblood. The book is Successful Failure. Thanks very much for coming on the Mayor's Magazine. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
All right. Another author on the other side of this break. You're watching the Mayor's Magazine.
In Oklahoma, the sights and sounds of severe weather are all too familiar. Do you know what to do when you hear an outdoor warning siren?
I'm Frank Barnes, Oklahoma City Emergency Manager. In Oklahoma City, the sirens sound to warn you that weather conditions may produce a tornado.
That's your signal to take shelter and seek information about where severe weather could strike.
And remember, an all-clear signal does not sound. Always monitor the weather conditions until the threat has passed.
Welcome back to the Mayor's Magazine. This month we are visiting with local authors. We visited with Devery Youngblood in the last segment about his book Successful Failure, and now we're going to visit with David Holt about one of Oklahoma City's best success stories, and that is the arrival of the NBA. David is my former chief of staff and now a state senator in Oklahoma City. Welcome to the Mayor's Magazine.
Thanks for having me on, and I think I'm joining the Five Timers Club on the Mayor's Magazine today, so pretty excited about that.
That must be a rare group that only a handful of people can put on their resumes, so congratulations for that. Also, congratulations on the book, Big League City, which is out now in the month of May. And this is a book that I think you were inspired to start looking at while you were still working on my staff, and I know that you were helping us kind of chronicle the timeline of events, because things were happening really fast. But go back into why. Why did you want to write this story?
Sure. Well, obviously the genesis of it starts with you allowing me to even be a part of this by bringing me on as your chief of staff. And as we were experiencing it, I did start to keep some contemporaneous notes because there were so many threads to the story. There were things going on here and in Seattle and in New Orleans and in New York. And so we started to kind of pull that together for our own decision making. As time went on, I really believed, after it was kind of over, that somebody ought to write about this. It seemed like nobody else was going to do it. And finally, it seemed like I was pretty well positioned. I kind of had a lot of the notes. I had been, at least on the periphery of everything that had occurred. I had been sports editor of my college paper, so maybe I possessed minimum competency to pull it off. And so I started working on it last year, 2011. Of course, visited with you. I lived some of it, but some of it I didn't. When the Hornets had arrived, I had not arrived in the mayor's office, so we kind of went over some of that. And you were a great help, and obviously have been supportive. And so wrote it over the course of 3 months or so over 2011, and then you revise and edit just as long. And we are now published with Full Circle Press, and that's where it's available at Full Circle Bookstore here in Oklahoma City at 50 Penn Place on Northwest Expressway.
What are people going to get out of this book? It's not just a picture book. It's not just a Kevin Durant biography. This is kind of behind the scenes, and some of it people are going to be vaguely aware of. But I I know there's no one that's going to be able to kind of put all this together, because you talk to so many different people who weren't talking to each other.
Yeah, that's right. There are so many different threads. There's an aspect of this book that is, kind of Bob Woodward politics behind the scenes, in this case here at City Hall. There's aspects of the book that become, when we get to Seattle, kind of a John Grisham, legal thriller. And then it's a sports book too. I mean, obviously Thunder fans are going to find it interesting because it's fun to cheer Kevin Durant, but finding out why he's here is a fascinating story. And it really is. I mean, my storytelling skills aside, anybody could tell this story and it'd be a heck of a story, because there were so many moments where things could have gone differently and we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation. And so many leaders like yourself, like Clay Bennett, who were just critical and are absolutely the right people at the right time. And it's kind of, when you read the book, you realize how almost magical it is that we're having this conversation today.
And growing up at Oklahoma City, you kind of have experienced the pre-Renaissance days and kind of what we're going through now. And to a certain extent, to the rest of the world, the NBA is kind of what validates that we've come this far. If it weren't for the NBA, it'd still be us claiming to be a big league city.
Yeah. To the rest of the world, we didn't exist before 2008, maybe 2005, if you count the Hornets. And so, I was born in 1979. The book really gets going in the 80s. We start in 1889, but we get through the first 100 years pretty quickly in the book. And then, in the 1980s is when it really begins, because that's when 25 years ago Mayor Norick was elected and things started to change. But I came of age in that city that was very different than today. As a senator, I get to talk to a lot of school kids, and it just amazes me how different they would view Oklahoma City than my peers did. They'll never know what it was like to grow up in a city without a major league sports team. And as superficial as that is, there's a reason we did this, and there's a reason that between the citizens and the owners, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent on this. It changes your city's image forever, and that ultimately does mean economic growth, jobs, population, culture, all those things. It's professional sports in America in the year 2012 are critical, and we're lucky to now be a part of that game.
Early in the book, you list kind of a cast of characters, and you rightfully mentioned Clay and George Shinn and the mayors of Seattle and myself. And you also mentioned the three cities.
Yeah.
New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Seattle. And when you look at it, I mean, there are stories going on in those cities so reflective, of what's happening with these franchises.
Yeah. The cities, as you mentioned, the first page is a cast of characters, and the cities are characters. They're characters in this story. And so that's interesting. So you're saying that kind of Katrina was almost symbolic of how the Hornets' own financial situation. In Seattle, things were actually going fairly well, and that was actually why the Sonics weren't doing well. There seemed to be a sense that they were too big for three sports teams. They didn't really care anymore. They didn't need to put forward the investment, which was in contrast to Oklahoma City. We were hungry. We would do anything to get one.
Yeah.
And in Seattle, it was like, well, we've got the Mariners and the Seahawks. We're not going to bend over backwards to keep the Sonics. And
right.
That's all interesting and worth exploring. And it's kind of, all of that is kind of why the story is interesting to certainly to Oklahoma Cityans and Thunder fans, but it's really a quintessentially American story about modern sports and the role they play and the way cities view themselves.
And what is still interesting to me is, when the team left from Seattle to Oklahoma City, that happens throughout professional sports. Every few years, some franchise moves. No city ever has what happened between New Orleans and Oklahoma City with that first one. I mean, we were really in uncharted territory trying to tiptoe our way through the public relations aspects of it, the business aspects of it, dealing with leagues that we'd never talked to before, wouldn't have taken our calls if we had thought to call them. and our fan base reacted so strongly. And I keep reminding, myself, having, being kind of a sports history buff myself, there was just no precedent for what happened. And the way our citizens responded just basically blew the roof off the opportunity. Recognized it as maybe just a one-year deal, but whatever, not going to blow this opportunity to see, NBA in Oklahoma City. And they overwhelmingly were so successful that they ensured the eventual relocation of a permanent team.
Well, there's a lot of things in the book that people who followed this story won't necessarily have known. Not earth-shattering, but interesting little anecdotes and things behind the scenes. And one of them is, you alluded to, I found it so interesting. I didn't really know this until we started talking about the book, that when you were trying to get the Hornets here, you still had no real belief that we would ever get an NBA team.
Yeah.
David Stern had told you that's not going to happen. So you were trying to do as well as you could with the Hornets so that you could impress the National Hockey League.
Right.
And you only really started to change your mind after the Hornets played and tickets were sold, and you started to think, maybe I can change David Stern's mind. And that's all in the book, and I think that's so interesting to kind of get inside your head during that period.
Yeah, it happened in just a few weeks. We went from not being on the NBA's radar screen to being the top team on the relocation list in 8 weeks. Unbelievable. Big League City, tell us again how we can get it.
It's available exclusively at Full Circle Bookstore. You can also find out more information about how to buy it or more information about the book at bigleaguecitybook.com.
All right, and Full Circle Books is at Penn Place.
50 Penn Place on Northwest Expressway, just across Northwest Expressway from Penn Square Mall. Everybody's got to know where that is.
David Holt, author, state senator. We'll be back with another author on the Mayor's Magazine right after this.
Doesn't that feel good? We'll keep those little buggies off you.
Buying pesticides each year can add up. Bet you have leftovers.
But I never know when I might need them.
So many, something's gotta go. I know it's tough.
But...
It's just not safe to store so many chemicals. Just take them to Oklahoma City's Household Hazardous Waste Collection Facility. They'll take care of everything. Hey, is that another bottle? Get more info at okc.gov.
Welcome back to the Mayor's Magazine. This is a special book TV version of the Mayor's Magazine. We're visiting with local authors. We have 3 nonfiction authors today and 1 fiction writer. And Lou Burney is the author of Whiplash River and its soon-to-be-out sequel, Whiplash River is the sequel, and the first one was?
Gutshot Straight.
Gutshot Straight. Okay, I get to read now here. This is a synopsis in one sentence of what Whiplash River is about. Former professional wheelman Charles Sheikh Bouchon is back, living in the Caribbean paradise of Belize with his lawless past far behind him until a gunshot tears through his beachside restaurant and he's on the run again. Who could not pick up that book and read it, Lou? Tell us about this adventure story.
Yeah, I mean, it's a follow-up to my first book, and basically the idea is here's a guy who's a former getaway driver, but he's really not that bad of a guy for a bad guy. He's actually a pretty good guy, and he wants to go straight, so he realizes his dream of opening his own restaurant in Belize. But it's one of those things where be very careful what you wish for, because it might come true. And very soon he has several people trying to kill him, a gigantic Belizean drug lord named Baby Jesus, and 2 redneck lovebird hitmen, and a ferocious female FBI agent who wants to arrest him. And he's got all these people. A billionaire natural gas tycoon wants to kill him. And and then his life gets even more complicated after that. So he's a poor guy. He's trying to do the right thing, and it's very difficult for that to happen for him.
Where'd you come up with this idea?
My first book, Gutshot Straight, was actually my version of Snow White, where I took Snow White into the modern age and made the evil queen the head of the Armenian mob in Los Angeles, and Snow White a not so pure as the driven snow kind of girl. And this one, what I started with was an Aesop's fable. I don't know if you're familiar with Androcles and the lion, the boy who takes the thorn out of the lion's paw, and so the lion doesn't eat him and becomes his friend for life. And I thought, in my version, what if that lion becomes the kind of friend you wish really wasn't your friend? And with friends like that, who needs enemies? And so that's kind of where I started, this idea that what if you're stuck with a friend who makes your life even more difficult than it was beforehand?
Your tie to Oklahoma City is?
I was born and raised here and lived here for many years, and then went away and returned for family reasons several years ago, just in time for all these wonderful things happening in the city. But I have deep roots in Oklahoma City, and I think a lot of the characters I write about are drawn on people I knew when I worked at the Gazette or when I worked at restaurants in the kitchens of restaurants here in Oklahoma City, and people I went to school with, and I think they populate my stories in a pretty deep way.
Who inspired you to write?
A lot of people. Like, I had some great school teachers when I was young, and my sisters taught me to read at a very early age, and I read a lot of books, and I think it's just one of those things. I think I have always had a burning desire to lie. And so I think I had either, I could choose to go into crime or politics or a more kind of wholesome pursuit like writing. And so that's kind of what I did. And it kind of has worked out well that I could use my powers for good, not evil, essentially.
Then the first book you wrote in this series, that was your first book?
Novel. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so when you write a book, people are going to say things about it. You know, and you can't be naive enough to think everything's going to be good.
I was that
like?
naive. I was that naive. I was definitely that naive, yeah.
Tell me about the feedback and what that felt like as an author to have people suddenly criticize or say nice things about your work.
Well, it's great when they say nice things, surprisingly. It was wonderful. Like, I think the first review that came in was a starred review on Booklist, and it just made my year. I was so happy. But what's interesting are the reviews on Amazon, because actual customers can post these reviews for everyone to see. And sometimes they're really thoughtful and insightful, and sometimes they're just insane. And those are almost more entertaining. And I get letters all the time, email from people with who love the books, or love the book, but they have very strange bones to pick. Like, there's this one guy who was infuriated that in my first book I use brand names. Like I said, the character drives a Cadillac Escalade or drinks a certain kind of bourbon. And he thought I was getting paid by these companies to put it in there, which is not the case at all. And he was just infuriated by that. So I love those kind of letters, too.
And the second book?
Whiplash River.
Whiplash River. When will that be out?
July 10th. And you can pre-order it now on Amazon or from your favorite indie bookstore.
All right. What's the best thing about being an author, other than getting to be on the Mayor's Magazine?
Other than that, well, give me a second. No, I think it's just the fame and the sort of the girls and the booze and yeah, so many things.
Yeah. Well, we're proud of you, Lou, and thanks for coming on the Mayor's Magazine, and good luck on this book and hopefully many more.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. You're watching the Mayor's Magazine, a special edition featuring local authors. We'll be right back after this.
Did you buy the flashlight and the batteries?
Yes.
Did you make sure we're not missing anything in the first aid kit?
Yep.
Did you go through the plan with the kids again?
Yes.
The more you prepare today, the more you'll be able to reduce the devastating effects of a tornado, an earthquake, a power outage, or any other disaster. Get a kit, make a plan, be informed. Visit ready.gov.
Welcome back to the Mayor's Magazine. This is our final segment. We're going to visit with Anita Arnold, who not only is an author, but annually responsible for the Charlie Christian Jazz Festival that highlights our summer music festival calendar in June. So welcome back to the Mayor's Magazine.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm pleased to be here.
One of our earlier guests, David Holt, was talking about it was his 5th visit, he thought, to the Mayor's Magazine. I got to thinking, Anita Arnold's been here a lot more than 5 times. Any idea how many times you've been on this show?
No,
I'm sure it predated me.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. Anita Arnold's probably in double figures. Her book is Oklahoma City Music, Deep Deuce and Beyond. Why did you write this book?
Well, actually, I wrote it at the urging of Arcadia Publishing, who published that. They're in Charlotte, South Carolina. But they publish histories throughout the country, and actually I wasn't inspired, but I had collected a lot of information. And in talking with them, they suggested that I should visit with their editor. Mm-hmm. And I really didn't have time, but they persisted. And so by them persisting, I went on and said, well, okay, I'm not getting out of this. So I sat down and I started to put it together. And that's essentially how it came to be.
What did you learn about the history of Oklahoma City's music presence that you didn't know before you wrote it?
Well, I didn't know that it was as rich as it is. Mm-hmm. I had learned about Charlie Christian from writing the first 3 books that I wrote, which was when we were looking for a fundraiser for the Charlie Christian Festival. I thought it would be a nice thing to write about Charlie Christian, tell people who he was, because I really didn't know myself. Mm-hmm. And when I started doing the research, it was just fabulous what Charlie Christian had done and had left this mark on the world that will go on forever and ever. And so when I started doing this book here, there were so many other musicians, that were in some cases declared to be even more talented than Charlie Christian. They did not take the same path that he took, but they were born and raised right here in Oklahoma City for the most part. And then I discovered that many of them were better known on the national level than they were here locally. And that was not so surprising, but it was surprising that there were so many. And a lot of the experiences that they had on the national level and even internationally were just unknown to us, and we just didn't have much here in the way of information to embrace. And so I found that very fascinating, and also the culture in which these musicians grew up in and thrived, and unfortunately moved away to have to reach their place in history, really. Mm-hmm. But then it's not just the musicians that were in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, which a lot of the history is about, but there are musicians that are still coming out of Oklahoma City that are making it on the national, international level. And one such musician graduated from Douglas High School. In fact, I think they all graduated from Douglas High School, to tell the truth. And that's Chester Thompson. And he left here and became very famous with Tower of Power. And then Carlos Santana hired him to come to work for him, writing his music and being his keyboardist. So Chester is wanting to come back for the festival this year. I don't know if we'll get him here, but nevertheless, there are still musicians coming out of Oklahoma City that are here with us that we just simply don't know that much about. Mm-hmm. But other people do.
All right. Well, let's shift subjects slightly. Let's talk about this year's Charlie Christian Jazz Festival. What are we going to see this year?
This year, we're going to see more in the way of local artists and regional artists. I just said that we have a lot of artists here that people really don't know about. Mm-hmm. And there are some new ones that we'll be bringing forth to the public this year. It'll be spread out in several venues. And as a matter of fact, one of the venues will be Douglas High School. And I want to briefly mention that because we're in a partnership with the Oklahoma Historical Society. And they're putting together a special exhibit down at Douglas High School, which will be accompanied by a program of music. And it will feature the fine arts department from long ago, so that not only students today, but teachers will understand what Douglas had back then. It wasn't just a choir. It wasn't just a band. We had bands, several choirs, even a string orchestra. So that information is generally not known to the public, and we intend to bring it to the forefront in this year's festival. So we'll have a lot of other good things too, like food and crafts and good music that goes on and on, May 29th through June 3rd. That's what we're looking at.
May 29th through June 3rd, downtown Oklahoma City, generally?
Generally in different spots.
Uh-huh. And people can get more information by doing what?
By calling us at 524-3800. It's real easy, 524-3800.
All right, it's the Charlie Christian Jazz Festival. And a quick, if someone wants to get a copy of this book, Oklahoma City Music, Deep Deuce and Beyond, what should they do?
Well, there are a lot of places: Walgreens, Barnes & Nobles, Borders, Amazon.com, Full Circle Bookstore, Hastings. We're everywhere with that little book.
All right, and the author is Anita Arnold. Always a joy to have you on the Mayor's Magazine.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Good luck with the Jazz Festival, and of course, good luck with continued sales of your wonderful book. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Mayor's Magazine. We have visited with 4 local authors. Some of their books not even out. Anita's, of course, been out and been successful here for a year or two. But I hope you'll take a chance to support our local authors, and we hope to have another show very similar to this in the upcoming editions of the Mayor's Magazine. I'll see you next month.
Oklahoma City homeowners wanting to save money on their electric and gas bills by making their home more energy efficient can apply for a green home loan offered through the City of Oklahoma City. The loans are offered to Oklahoma City residents whose household income is $100,000 or less. Some of the energy efficient upgrades that can be made with a loan include installation of energy efficient windows or exterior doors, adding insulation to the attic and walls, or replacing inefficient window units with central heat and air. For more information about the loans, call the Community Action Agency at 232-0199.